Welcome to the Policy Shop, weekly conversations with public policy experts where we'll dive into the most important issues affecting all of us here in Illinois. I'm Hilary Gowins. Let's get started. Joining me today is Bryce Hill, Senior Research Analyst at the Illinois Policy Institute. Bryce has been following the data on Illinois' economy for the past several years, even before the pandemic. And today he'll share his insights on where Illinois' job recovery stands and how it compares to the rest of the country. Bryce, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So you're kind of like the jobs detective. I always come to you with questions about what news headlines are saying and what's really going on. And one of the recent was a tweet from the governor that I thought was really interesting that I shared with you. Governor Pritzker said something like, Illinois is leading the nation in new business startups. Is that true?
It depends, like all these questions. And I think one of the reasons why he refers to me as a detective is, there's always more going on than meets the eye. So his tweet said that Illinois is leading the nation, or Midwest, in startups. And so, my initial question was, well, how are we defining startups? What does that mean? And, because we didn't provide any source material for that, let's see what's out there and then, see if that's actually true. So the best I could come up with is we're referring to, the governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, is referring to startups as business applications. So businesses apply for employer identification numbers. That metric is tracked by the Census Bureau to kind of see what levels of business activity are happening in the state, across all states. And so from that aspect, yes, Illinois is experiencing a very high level, and it traditionally has experienced a very high level of business applications. So people are applying for and trying to start businesses in Illinois. That part is true. It's the highest in the Midwest, 10th in the nation. In terms of total business applications, there's about a little bit over 15 business applications per 1,000 residents annually. That doesn't necessarily mean that these businesses, though, result in actual employers or, we ever see a business that opens its doors. It just means that the first step in the process is underway. So unfortunately, when you dig into the numbers and you look at, well, how many of these businesses actually result in, an employer business within the next year, that's a metric that's tracked by the Census Bureau. Actual business formation, despite being among the highest in the nation and the highest in the Midwest, business formation actually falls below the national median and 6th in the Midwest. So everything falls basically back to the average when we talk about business formation. So what we have here going on here is, you have high potential, you have people trying to start businesses, but for some reason between step one and the final step of the process of opening your doors, something gets in the way in Illinois, causing actual business formation to fall below the average. And so it actually turns out that, in fact, Illinois is not leading the Midwest in startups when we actually measure it appropriately as new businesses.
Businesses that employ people.
Businesses that employ people, yeah, new employers. There's a trend in self-employment that has happened with the pandemic. You have probably noticed or know people that have taken their future into their own hands and started their own small business or something, or were forced to because they were laid off. So self-employment numbers virtually everywhere have risen. Illinois has been no exception, although it hasn't been rising the fastest in Illinois by any means. It's pretty average there again. But when it comes to businesses that employ people beyond just the sole proprietor, Illinois falls below the national median, middle of the pack in the Midwest, despite all this activity that would suggest Illinois was going to be churning out some of the best and most frequent creator of businesses.
So you said something really interesting. So there are a lot of people who want to start a business, but somewhere along the line here in Illinois, something disrupts those people's ability to actually create jobs. And I want to come back to that. Maybe you can finish with that at the end of this question. But my question for you next is just to back up. What did Illinois' economy look like prior to the pandemic? And what does the job situation in the economy look like today?
Yeah, so prior to the pandemic, when you look at long term, the past 20 years leading up to the pandemic, Illinois' economic trajectory was one that wasn't that promising to begin with. So Illinois, when you think back decades to like kind of the boom of the Midwest and manufacturing, things like that, Illinois was booming. Illinois kind of reached its peak, at least relative to the U.S. economy, in the 50s and 60s at the height of U.S. manufacturing. As manufacturing has kind of, increasingly played less of a role in the United States economy, Illinois' role in the U.S. economy, Illinois' growth has kind of followed that trend and lagged. So over the past 20 years, relative to the Midwest, Illinois' growth has been 22% lower. Not only is the Midwest kind of lagging as the South and the Western states have kind of seen this large population growth, this large growth of industry, in the Midwest and the Northeast have kind of shrank. Illinois' role within even a shrinking community has been one that is, lagging. So Illinois was not on a good trajectory beforehand, but things were not bad, let's say, in 2019. The Great Recession hit Illinois particularly hard. Illinois was one of the last states to recover from that. It took almost 10 years to actually recover job losses. It was just only a couple months before the pandemic that Illinois' unemployment rate dipped below 4%, which the U.S. economy had been at 4% or lower for an extended period of time pre-pandemic. So it was essentially, the decade before the pandemic that Illinois took to recover from the last economic shock of the state. So, we had really just gotten our feet back underneath of us from the previous downturn, when suddenly we are hit with the COVID-19 downturn, the state mandates and lockdowns that caused massive job losses here. We saw in excess of 1.2 million Illinoisans unemployed at a given time. The unemployment rate, skyrocket to over 20% in real time, according to real time estimates. Before the pandemic, not doing so great. Great Recession happens. Illinois is trudging along, finally able to get back to where it was pre-2008, essentially, and then gets hit with another blow with COVID-19 and lockdown measures that really devastated the economy right when it was getting back to where it was a decade ago.
So maybe this will get at the why. What is it about Illinois? Because Illinois has a lot going for it in so many ways. We have just a vibrant city of, obviously Chicago is a place where so many people from the Midwest flock to. You and I both came here from Ohio after we graduated college. But there's something going on that causes our state to struggle in the aftermath of economic shocks. So you mentioned after the Great Recession, it took us a decade to recover, whereas most states, it didn't take nearly that long. And now again, here we are in the aftermath of the COVID-19 downturn. And while other states are recovering already, here we are and we're falling behind again. So what is it that's causing this?
Yeah, I would say that much like the business formation story of, this really high potential, Illinois, when you look at, ranks of where should people start a business, where are the best places to live, where are the best places to get a job, on several metrics, Illinois and Chicago rank extremely well. Illinois is often cited as, having one of the best infrastructures in the nation. You have major highways, access to virtually every other part of the nation, stemming from these travel routes. You have university cities, downstate. You have Chicago, providing, some of the most educated population and workforces there are. You have, basically a large portion of the talent of the, highly skilled workers in the Midwest flock to Chicago. So access to human capital and just physical capital with the money surrounding Chicago. All these things should be a recipe for success when it comes to businesses and, attracting employees and creating a good place to live, high standards of living. But it's this portion in the middle between the potential and the actual outcome for business formation, but also jobs and everyday life in the state of Illinois where things get muddier. So the flip side of that coin is that there are lots of metrics where Illinois ranks very poorly for business formation prospects or employment or standards of living. And those almost entirely stem from public policy. So you have property taxes, which are among the highest in the nation, which take, affordable Midwestern housing in Illinois and force you to pay essentially 7 additional mortgage payments a year in property taxes. They're the second highest in the nation, and they make the cost of your home substantially more expensive and are pricing people out of their homes. Then you have a business tax environment which consistently ranks among the least friendly in the Midwest, typically only outdone by Minnesota when it comes to business tax climate, ranked by the Tax Foundation. And then you have an ever-changing and ever-increasing total tax burden. Wallet Hub actually just came out with a study yesterday suggesting that Illinois has the highest state and local tax burden in the nation. And the final piece of that is, in exchange for this increasingly cumbersome, environment, tax environment, Illinoisans don't see spending in the public sector. They don't see their public tax dollars going to things that they care about, things that raise the value of their homes, that enrich their communities, because we have such a large pension problem in the state. A third of the state budget essentially is going to public pension debt. There's $130 billion and tied up in our state systems that are going to have to be paid or resolved in some form or fashion. That problem exists at the local level as well for property taxes, and it's crowding out funding for things like schools and classrooms. So your property taxes are going up to offset, the lack of state funding for those things. So it's really, the step in the middle, as we keep referring to it, of government that gets in the way, that strips the high potential of the success that it should be having, and resulting in lackluster outcomes.
And you mentioned property taxes, and I think, I own a home here, and so I understand how painful that is as a homeowner. But I think people sometimes forget that this is not just something that people who own houses or condos here pay. It's, if you own a business property, you pay the property taxes, and that burden's significant. Or even if you're renting a space, that cost gets passed on to you in the form of higher rent. And so I guess the last question I want to ask you is what do we do to get back on track? And I don't want to pigeonhole you into talking about pension reform, although that's a big part of the equation. But broadly speaking, what path does Illinois need to take to flip our outcomes so that our economy is recovering quicker, better, faster, all of that?
Yeah. So a large piece of that is obviously pension reform. But another part of that, I think, is more almost philosophical in approach. So you have all of this high potential that we've been talking about and that everybody recognizes. So let's just start getting out of the way. Illinois has the third most regulated. It's the third most regulated state in the nation. There are more regulations here. The regulatory code is longer. It's more convoluted and complicated than virtually any other state in the nation. So basically simplifying not only, the rules that businesses have to operate within or individuals have to operate within, but just, getting out of the way, not making everything in Illinois so convoluted would go a long way. And so one would be, obviously pension reform and the tax burden. And then the other is, we have licensing requirements that we've worked on in the past that have, hindered people from achieving employment or becoming employed in an industry where they want to. So there's a litany of things that Illinois could do to get out of the way, but we're not doing any of them.
But we should.
We should. We have, as we've been saying, there's enormous potential, and people across the state are wanting to, create businesses. People are wanting to live here, choosing to leave a place. Illinois is plagued with population decline driven by domestic outmigration. And that's a really tough decision. People have to uproot their entire lives to move out of state. And that's not a decision that people make lightly. Things have to be really bad. The situation has to be really dire to get people to do that. And so the fact that so many people are really reflects on how little opportunity there has been, or how little hope some people in the state have for their future, and they just can't afford to stay.
Well, I think it's really important to talk about these issues. I think a lot of the time we get obsessed with pension reform because it is sort of like the obvious thing that you need to fix in terms of spending and making sure people feel a return on their investment. But I think your broader point about just creating an environment where people can succeed, because we know people want to succeed, that's really an important message, and I'm glad that you're sharing that with everybody. So Bryce, thanks so much for joining me, and we'll talk again soon.